So I'll do the invocation today. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, for all that you've given us, for all that you've blessed us with. We know you've been good to us beyond what we deserve, and we ask for your wisdom and understanding in all that we do today, that we could do it for your honor and your glory. And we pray this in your name. Amen. Amen. So we're going to do the, actually, Representative Reeves has both the bills we're going to look at today. I said one, I made it two, only because it's Representative Reeves, I guess. We're going to do House Bill 511 first. We've got some people from EPD here, from OPB, and Natural Resources, or I guess I should say DNR to stay with the lingo, if we need them, and maybe not necessarily if we don't need them, but we'll see how it goes. So this one, before he starts, I will say that we passed a constitutional amendment last year that had been around for several years. I think Jay Powell had started it originally, that would say, you know, truth in fees. If you're going to put a fee in there, let it go to its intended purpose. There was some discussions about recessions and things that came up, so there were different compromises made in there, but we did get it out, and I was actually the Senate sponsor of that last year. They got it on the ballot, and it did pass overwhelmingly. So we appreciate the late Ways and Means Chairman Powell that started this process, and this is a continuation of that process. This is what I guess you would say is some enabling language that the amendment said you could do after the amendment passed. And so with that, if you want to do it there at the podium, I'll leave it up to you. Yeah, you can spread out and get a little bit more comfortable. What does that say down there? 8? Okay. So
check.
The floor is yours, Representative Reeves.
Thank you, Chairman Huffstetler. And I think I'm spending more time in your committee this session than even Judiciary, so I don't know what's gone wrong here. But
well, you may be the only one spending time in this committee for a while, the way it's going. So
okay. Duly noted. So I've got some bills to move out of my Judiciary Subcommittee later this week, and look forward to it. But you just teed this up and explained it perfectly. This is the enabling language from the constitutional amendment, and what this does, the amendment requires, as everybody in this room knows, the General Assembly for a long time has created certain fees that Georgians pay on for various and sundry things. And when we pass the legislation that requires these fees, we set up that those fees are to go to dedicated purposes. And so what has happened in times, and my understanding is that it's not really so much right now, but there have been times where these dedicated fees have been basically siphoned into the general fund and used not for what they were originally intended to. And so this bill and the constitutional amendment, and thus this enabling legislation, it mandates that 1% of our state budget, as determined by the prior fiscal year, so in this case it would be $230 million, 1% of the budget. If you add up all of the fees that we require on various things, it comes to more than 1% of that revenue. But this requires that 1% of that be constitutionally mandated to go to the fund or the purpose of what it was originally intended for. And so there's been a lot of work with Senate budget, House budget, and OPB since the constitutional amendment passed to figure out how we're going to add up to get to that 1%. And so there are 9. What this bill does, it's a long bill, but it's actually very repetitive. It essentially sets up 9 trust funds for 9 different fees. And I handed out everybody a help sheet. If you need help falling asleep tonight, you should read it. But the 9 funds, or the trust funds, are the Solid Waste Trust Fund, which comes from the scrap tire fee. Number 2 is the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund, which comes from the Solid Waste Tipping Fee. Number 3 is the State Children's Trust Fund, which comes from the marriage and divorce filing fees. Number 4 is the Wildlife Endowment Trust Fund, which comes from the Lifetime Sportsman License fees. Number 5 is the Trauma Care Network Trust Fund, which comes from super speeder fees. Number 6 is Transportation Trust Fund, which comes from the hotel motel fees, alternative vehicle fees, and heavyweight vehicle impact fees. Number 8 is the Georgia Agricultural Trust Fund, which comes from the agricultural tax exemption fees. And then, well, and I guess actually I counted wrong. Number 8 is actually the Fireworks Trust Fund, which comes from the fireworks excise tax. And then number 9 is the Georgia Transit Trust Fund, which comes from the ride share fees that we passed a couple of years ago. So the bill is very mechanical. For each of these 9 trust funds, it creates the trust fund, references the constitutional amendment, and then dictates who the trustee of that trust fund is. Like, for example, just by happenstance, we have Director Rawlings in the room right now on the other bill. He would be the trustee for the Children's Fund, the Children's Trust Fund, because he's the director of DFACS. In all of these cases, the director of the agency that is most relevant to the fund is the person that is designated as the trustee. And so they're responsible for seeing the fees used. Each section of the bill also dictates what the fees are to be used for. And then it also requires that the trustee prepare a report at the end of each year that will be given to the General Assembly, where they document and verify that that things were done accordingly to this statute. So it's a long bill, and it's a lot of complicated, in some cases, tax language, but it's very duplicative. It just simply establishes these 9 trust funds. These 9 trust funds add up to less than 1% of the state budget. The bill and the constitutional amendment address issues of when if these were to add up to more than 1%, or what we would do in the case of a financial emergency being declared, and how we have an eject button that if certain conditions are met from a financial emergency, then we needed to use these funds for other things for Georgia as opposed to these dedicated purposes, then that ability is there. That's the simple layman's explanation of the bill. I will be happy to answer any questions. If there's any hard ones, the Senator Dixon is here. And then we do have Stephanie Beck with OPB that is available on the screen, that she's been heavily involved in this matter.
Just maybe quickly go through the process of if we wanted to add another one to this.
Yes, the bill contemplates future dedicated fees, and that is found in Section 11. Section 11 is where
page 18.
That's right.
Or maybe actually back
17.
on 17.
Section 11, this describes if the General Assembly were to contemplate new dedicated fees, then there would have to be something that's called a fiscal analysis that would be done on that fee ahead of time. So, not the same thing as a fiscal note, but of the same, but a similar thing, a fiscal analysis, and it would have to be determined its impact on the 1% cap, et cetera. And these also will require 2/3 majority of both the House and Senate. It would be how we would handle dedicated fees moving forward.
And then if 2/3 does it and it goes forward, I guess then if it got over 1%, it would proportionally affect all the fees, or?
That's right. It can be, there are some. Yes, there would be some portions that would be removed in order to make it work. Obviously, the numbers of this have to work, and there are certain dedicated, like the transportation. A lot of this is transportation fees, but that doesn't. The numbers that are being directed pursuant to this bill to get us less than 1%, that does not equate to the entire number of revenues that we get from transportation matters, if that makes any sense.
Right. Okay, questions from the committee. Senator Jackson on 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you for being here today. Just a simple question. I understand that this bill is getting a lot of attention, especially from downstairs. My question is the trust fund as it deals with solid waste trust fund, and you find most of your sources coming from scrap tire fees. Am I correct, sir?
That's right.
Now, will most of those fees that's collected, will that go to related activities such as scrap tire, or will that be used for things like curbside recycling?
Recycling, that's right. Most of those, and I know that Kevin Perry has a lot of interest in this with the beverage industry because of their focus on recycling, drink plastic and whatnot. So I know that he's probably spoken with a lot of the folks on this committee, but those would help go towards recycling programs. That's right.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman, if you may.
Sure.
But in your initial statement, you're saying that the fees that's collected will go directly toward related activities. So, in your opinion, curbside recycling is related to scrap tires?
Well, scrap tire is in the concept of environmental. I would categorize it as an environmental issue, and scrap tires and disposing of scrap tires is something that is a tenuous process, and so the concept of recycling is directly related to the idea of the environmental impact that tires have and other recyclable materials.
If I could, I know we've got EPD here too. They might want to respond to that question.
I just think that's a little broad, just in my opinion, but I want to support the bill, but I just want that question answered.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We've got a representative. You want to come up, and maybe the podium would be good to address this from.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Eunice, Deputy Director of EPD. What I'm going to do, I'm only a month in the job, so we have Sarah Visser, who's our Assistant Land Branch Chief, who's joining us via Zoom. She can respond to the specifics of your question, Senator. So, Sarah, are you with us?
Okay, you want to put us on Zoom there then? That'd be great.
I am. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Sarah Visser. I'm the Assistant Branch Chief for Land Protection at EPD. And there are two places that list the ways that Solid Waste Trust Fund dollars can be used in the code. And the first of those describes how EPD uses it. And that is for scrap tire abatement through our prevention program, through our enforcement program, and also through cleanup projects. And that continues to be the primary use that EPD sees for these dollars. In addition, EPD can use them for abandoned landfills and for some solid waste reduction activities. And then we also have local grants that are authorized for use for Solid Waste Trust Fund. And those are primarily also based for scrap tire. In fact, the only local government grant program that EPD currently has is for the removal of scrap tires in communities. So while there are other authorized uses available for the Solid Waste Trust Fund, we do expend the bulk of those dollars on scrap tire and then also on abandoned landfills.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is that is the primary use of that. The code has listed that as the primary use, but it's also allowed a couple of other uses too. So you're saying this would be consistent with what's going on all along?
Exactly. It's the same policy we've always had.
Okay. Senator Jackson's got another question.
What's the percentage of it that directly goes to scrap tires?
I apologize. I don't have that right in front of me, but I will be happy to provide that information to y'all following this call. It is the majority of that money is spent for staffing at EPD for the solid waste scrap tire program. So I can tell you that is the majority of the funds go to support 23 staff positions at EPD dedicated to scrap tire.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right. Senator Cowser, you're at 12.
Question is for Leader Reeves, if I can ask him. I am a little bit troubled about us tying our hands by, once we put these funds in the trust fund, we don't have access to them for other appropriations. right?
That would be correct, unless there was a financial emergency, which would, and all that language is in the constitutional provision of what, if a financial emergency was declared, and then it would allow us to be able to work through the otherwise requirements. And so, and that is an understandable concern, but I believe that it's addressed. It's most likely to be a reality if we experience an economic downturn, right? And if those were to happen and we had a financial emergency, then we would be able to get around the mandate here. There's certainly some balancing and competing policy interest in this, and I think that there is, when we pass a dedicated fee and we require people to pay that money for that thing, I think that there is a level of accountability on the General Assembly that we actually use the money for what we say we do. And right now in today's budgeting world, I think Senator Tillery, I hope, we haven't asked him this, but I hope he would agree with me. I believe that that we are pretty much doing what this bill would require, that this would just require down the road 20, 30 years from now, whenever we have a mandated fee, that at least up to 1% of the total of the revenue that come from mandated fees go to the purpose.
At least 1%.
Less than
Wait a minute,
1%.
Mark, let him finish.
Okay. 1% of the budget? Or, because this is $250 billion you're tying up for 10 years here.
It would be
$250 billion per year going into these trust funds if we don't appropriate it.
no, it's 200. It would be about, I believe, from last year's revenue numbers, it would be 230 million.
Right. 250 million is 1/4 of $1 trillion.
$1 billion.
So we're talking about of $1 billion.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
So,
I just worry about every year we're going to find another dedicated source, and the next thing you're going to know, we only have, about 5% of our budget that we actually have. There's a reason for Chairman Tiller to even be here and allocate.
Sure, and that's why it's capped at 1%. Only 1%, less than 1%. Let me say it again. Less than 1% can be required once the fees exceed 1% of the prior budget. Then there's mechanisms that happen that remove things so that we always stay below 1%. It'll never be more than 1%. It's dedicating less than 1% of our state budget based on the prior year numbers to the things that we collect money for their specific purposes.
So that's in the aggregate.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so this number couldn't go over this year $270-something million.
It couldn't go over
Don't we have a 27?
approximately 230 from last year. So
last year's number was 23. I know we're
I mean, this
higher.
budget's $27 billion.
So
That's right.
We could go up
270
$270 million.
That's right.
next year because you based it on the last year's budget.
That's exactly right.
All righty, thank you.
And 99% at least of the budget can't be captured by this, so it's very limiting, and that's what the constitutional amendment did. It was sort of a compromise between everybody, and as Representative Reese stated, there's even contingencies for if revenue goes down, recession, that kind of thing, that it lets you out of it. And I know you can only do that so many times in 10 years or something, I believe.
That's
I don't
right.
remember all the details, but,
That's one more.
okay, go ahead.
All right, so that makes me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say this year we decide broadband is a really important priority to us, and we impose a fee on, your internet fees or whatever to go into a new broadband trust fund. We're already bumping up on our 1% cap. By locking these in for 10 years, have we tied our hands on anything else, or can we come back in year by year and abandon one trust fund to create other priorities that we'd rather dedicate funds for?
This would lock these particulars in, but there would be nothing that would keep us from appropriating. If we did an internet fee like you discussed to use for broadband purposes, then there's nothing that stops us from appropriating that to the precise dollar.
But it couldn't be dedicated.
It just wouldn't be dedicated in the sense that these things that add up to less than 1% are.
Okay.
Okay. Senator Gooch.
Yeah, so my questioning is somewhat in line with what Senator Cowsert was asking. So if you look at the total on your I guess it's your summary, page 2. All of those dedicated fees that are in this bill add up to roughly $230 million in fiscal year 20. So, and the majority of it is the hotel motel taxes.
That's right.
If we hit our cap, our limit, explain the process of how you rationalize that. And how do you, I guess some of that money will go back to the general fund for general appropriations, because you're repealing the trigger. Whenever we passed House Bill 170, we put a trigger in there that said if the General Assembly doesn't appropriate 100% of the money for transportation, then it would be reduced by, I think it was half the first year and then eliminated the second year. My concern is if we pull that trigger out of the law and we hit our caps, most of the money is going to be hotel motel fees. Then we're taking money away from GDOT if the General Assembly decides to spend the money somewhere else. Am I wrong on that thinking?
I would say that the two things you're talking about are not mutually exclusive, and it might be helpful to have Stephanie Beck come in on this, but there is the money that we collect pursuant to House Bill 170 and any requirements that we have based on that legislation to spend it, accordingly, isn't interrupted by this. All of the requirements that would move forward with that, and if there's any penalties for appropriating that money otherwise, that all kind of sits on an island that it sits on right now. This is just saying that these 9 trust funds are going to be created to hold monies that come from these fees, all of which have to add up to less than 1%. And you're right, the transportation portion of this is the majority of what we're dealing with, but there's no, but by having it where not every penny that's collected is required to go in this, it doesn't invalidate the other aspects of what came with House Bill 170. And Mr. Chairman, if I think
Yeah,
Stephanie
and we
Beck-
can get her on, and I want just a second, but I guess the point I would like to make is the constitutional amendment for 170 is a completely separate issue. That was done with the constitutional amendment.
No, it was
It's-
not.
It's dedicated, wasn't
House
it?
Bill 170 was not constitutional amendment.
But there has been legislation, I thought, that dedicated that. And this isn't affecting that money.
But it's not repealing the trigger that was in the law. I thought I saw
No.
that in your summary. I'm looking for it now, but I don't see it. But in the summary, it says that you're repealing the trigger.
I guess what I was trying to say is, doesn't it constitutionally, those fees have to go to transportation?
No, only motor fuel tax.
Motor fuel does,
But
yeah.
not the hotel motel money.
No,
or
not the hotel motel.
That's right.
But that's a very
That's
small
right.
part.
No, it's $200 million. It's the majority of this money
I
we're
mean, as
talking
far as
about.
all transportation dollars,
Right.
it's a small part. Anyway,
And
we'll get
it's
Stephanie
well,
on.
and to that point, Mr. Chairman, if I might, the Transportation Trust Fund will consist of the hotel motel fees, the alternative fuel vehicle fees, and the heavyweight vehicle highway impact fees. Those are the 3 fees that will fund the Transportation Trust Fund as opposed to the gas tax.
Correct.
Okay, if we can get her on now, you want to tell us your understanding and maybe help us out on this?
Certainly. So what we've contemplated is that every year when the governor produces his annual budget report, there would be a reconciliation page to tie the prior year collections for all of these fees to the most recent revenue estimate that's included with the governor's budget. So should all of these add up to a number that exceeded 1% of the current revenue estimate, we could likely take a pro rata share across each of these through the appropriation to reconcile back to that total 1% of the current budget. However, it would not preclude the General Assembly from providing additional state general funds towards any of these purposes. So if you were concerned about funding for certain transit activities or other items that were currently funded through HB 170 state general funds, you could still fund state general funds towards those activities. It would not prohibit you from going over and above.
But doesn't require it, though.
Correct.
No, we didn't require in the constitutional amendment that anything over than 1% be dedicated, but we weren't even doing close to that before then. It was
Can
much
you,
less than that. So this was trying to get a little bit better truth in advertising on the fees we were collecting and what they were going
And
for.
I support the intent. I just want to make sure we know what we're walking into. So look on page 3 of the summary, section. Yes. Where did it go? I saw it a second ago. It repeals the trigger. Oh, section 13 on page 4. So if you look at the summary, it says repeals the trigger that would reduce the highway impact fee for heavy vehicles by 50%. So that was our trigger. Now we're going to repeal that trigger. Therefore, there's no longer a trigger. So it's back to the will of the legislature. So if we hit that cap at 1%, which it sounds like we will pretty quickly, we can start siphoning some of that money off and putting it in other places in the budget. So now we'll be paying for these alternative, fuel vehicles and heavy trucks and so forth. It'll just go to some other portion of the budget at the discretion of the General Assembly. The intent of that trigger was to make sure we did not do that. We wanted to put the guardrails in place since we didn't have the constitutional amendment. So I just bring that up because we are basically taking away that protection. Does that make sense?
I know what you're saying, yeah, and
So if,
I think the intent is to put more money into these categories, but I know what you're saying. We're trying to promise at least 1%. Okay, Senator Cowser. Oh, yeah, you did. I'm sorry, Senator Rock was first.
Thank you. My understanding is that the whole point of this debate we've been in as a legislature for some years now is that we needed to restore trust to the trust funds. The public was paying out of their pocket in these different categories of fees, and they were packaged as being able to address, for example, the solid waste trust fund, to address this huge problem with tires, scrap tires all across the state. And yet, I think Stephanie can correct me, but I believe 60% of those funds that were being collected were going into the general fund. We're not being allocated to the scrap tire elimination and the other things to scrap. And so that was the kind of the gaping contradiction that was giving us a black eye and to the public. That the funds weren't going to what they've been collected for. So I think under that, and you saw 80% of the public voted, or the voters voted for that constitutional amendment. So that's what we're curing here. And I understand your point because that's the special thing about that trigger. I had a question for the author. Some of these trust funds
This is for you, Representative Reeves, she's asking, I think.
already existed. And
Yes.
which ones got added and new? I know I'm very much in favor of the Georgia Transit Trust Fund. That's a good move to allocate those dollars with the excise tax, ground transport trips. Some of these are brand new funds that didn't exist before. So people have been busy getting their favorite fee attached. Which ones are new to us? And
If possible, I'd like for Stephanie to chime in on that. And as far as people working to get their, this is the model that was developed before session started regarding with the Senate, House, and OPB with the budget offices and the OPB all working together. This was developed before session even started. So it's not. I guess what I'm trying to say is folks haven't been. It wasn't changing up to the last minute before it passed the House. This was kind of set in stone a while back. But if Ms. Beck can explain which funds are new.
then I have one more question.
Yes, so the higher transport fees for the Transit Trust Fund would be new because those are enacted this year. So this is the first year that we're collecting those. But I believe that the legislation that the General Assembly passed last year expressed the intent that those funds be used for transit purposes. So this would codify that and dedicate those funds. And then the other piece is the gate fee has not previously been dedicated before, but those were included in the original bill just based on feedback over the years that those funds should be being used for agricultural purposes.
So you're saying there are two new funds that were created? That's what I was asking. How many are long-standing and which ones are new?
There's no new fee being created in this bill. All of these fees are in existence now. The most recent is the higher transport fees that were in, I forget the bill number, possibly.
It was the Uber Lyft bill.
Oh, okay. The other thing, and this may just be, this on page 3 of our Senate Research Office summary, the Wildlife Endowment Trust Fund is repeated twice. Under Georgia Trauma Care, it's also it's repeated there, and that's just some kind of Scrivener's error, I think. But you see what I'm saying? Had the same sentence for Wildlife Endowment as you do for Georgia Trauma Care.
What line are you on?
Well,
These don't have lines.
this isn't on the
Page 3.
bill, this is just
This is the
some
summary.
research.
Okay.
I know,
Yeah.
I know it's
Summary,
research,
yeah.
but it ought to be clarified. That's not, that's just a Scrivener's error in all likelihood.
Yeah, but if it's,
And it's not law. I understand this is not law.
yeah,
but,
this particular document's not law.
No, it's not law, but we ought to have a correct version of it, as we approach passing this on the floor.
And a lot of these, such as, the trauma, I'm familiar with that from health, that the money wasn't going to trauma. Some of it was, some of it wasn't. Actually, it stayed the same amount for many years.
That's right.
And so all of these were, the intent of this is to get the money to where it's supposed to go to, but we had to put in some limitations because of concerns like Senator Cowser's, is just so much of the money getting eaten up that we limited it to 1%.
Yeah, well, it's very, I support it. I think I think it's very rational, the way the fees are being allocated here,
And one other thing, we've got our Chair of Appropriations here on the Senate side, because I know he's been thoroughly involved in this. So if you want to speak to your understanding or any of the issues, you're welcome to do that if you'd like to. You can go to 9 there.
Thank you, Senator Hostetler. I was just here protesting not being on the Finance Committee, actually, but thank you.
Yeah.
Is this live?
Don't start making everybody mad.
I don't know, is it
Are you on?
I don't know.
Here, why don't you?
We talked about it.
I said I was just here to protest not being appointed to the Finance Committee, but thank you for
Yeah,
letting me speak.
I don't understand either. Jack was always on it, so.
Oh, now that's a dagger. Thank you. Appreciate that. No, thanks for hearing the bill. House Bill 511, we actually began working with the House and the OPB back in the fall, trying to honor the wishes really of this body previously. Just to carry you back through some history, remind you that this was something that Jay Powell cared a lot about on the House side, dedicating fees. And you mentioned Senator Hill. Senator Hill had some issues with that, and I appreciate Senator Cowser bringing that up. Where Senator Hill landed was dedicating fees, particularly those that were related to solid waste and hazardous waste. So what we tried to do in the off session is make sure that we focused mainly on those fees, but also knowing that the Senate has cared a ton about dedicating fees as they related to transportation. So that's how we got to the fees, the ones that we did get to. There was a comment earlier about whether or not this would reduce those funds later on from Senator Gooch. I actually think it is going to add to them and allow them to continue to be funded at a higher rate, and we look forward to that. But then also to Senator Cowser's comment about whether or not this puts the state in a bad position financially going forward. I think not doing it puts us in a worse position. Had we not passed that constitutional amendment, I think we would end up dedicating fees year over year, over and over, until we ended up at a point where we were only allocating 5% of discretionary funds. So I'd ask this committee, if they don't mind, based on what's already happened with the House working in on the off session, we were integrally involved. We changed language daily with them, and then OPB allowing us to be involved in that process. If it would serve the will of the committee, if the committee would find it favorable, to pass it as is because it was a really carefully crafted compromise, and I think answers concerns that Senator Calvert had, as well as answers concerns that Senator Gooch had, even though those seem to be somewhat on opposite sides.
Other question, I guess, to both of you gentlemen is, what's the magic of 10 years? It always concerns me we're tying our own hands for a 10-year period. One of these, you know, this committee, Senator Albers has always insisted on sunsets on these tax breaks. This does away with sunsets on some of these or extends them for this 10-year period. We're tying the hands of 5 future legislatures, and it doesn't allow these funds to lapse at all. That's what we're getting around, and I just wonder, is that a magic number? You just pick that out, or is that the max the law would allow us, or did
No,
you
sir.
consider any shorter length of time?
We did consider shorter lengths of time. The reason that we went with 10 years is because, one, we wanted there to be a sunset so that the legislature will have to revisit this issue. We may decide that over time that other things matter to us more, whether it be other transportation matters. Looks like in 10 years we may not even be dealing with highway impact fees. We might be dealing with some other type of fees, those alternative fuel fees, et cetera, that we need to adjust so that we stay below the 1% cap, while at the same time being able to fund the things that the state really cares about. And 10 years was also long enough to do something. If you do it for 4 years, well, as soon as you implement it, well, now we're closing it down. So we tried to push out, and then the thought was, well, do you do it 8? Well, that seems like too much, that it conflicts and runs with terms that we're running on and that other people in this building are running on. So the 10 years was sort of a compromise to have time to actually do something, while at the same time actually having a sunset.
And I believe the legislature can change it, they can take a proactive approach to do it. The constitutional amendment had it where it could be changed if 5 years from now we see some huge problem. But again, no more than 1%, trying to put truth in advertising in our fees. Our President Pro Tem, do you have a comment? You're number 4.
Speaking of truth in advertising. But no, I would like to thank the author and the others for speaking on behalf of the bill. And it sounds like we've really got a carefully crafted piece of legislation. It's got a sunset on it, and it has some trigger mechanisms. And at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, I'd propose a motion.
Well, we can have a motion and have further discussion.
I'll move to pass.
Okay. We've got a motion, a second. Any other discussion at this time?
I was going to ask a follow-up question.
Okay, go ahead.
Appropriations. So there's a bill, I believe it's in this committee. It's not on the agenda yet, that adds another $5 fee per night to non-hotels. So it'd be all your cabins, be Airbnbs and what have you. We don't know what the note is on that, do we? Do we know what the fiscal note is on that?
I think it's about 30 million.
So there's 30 million. Let's say it's 100 million.
Right.
Or 50 million. We really don't know because there's a lot of cabins all over the state that are being rented right now. They're not paying that. So if we hit our cap next year on this money, any additional growth in hotel, motel fees, any additional growth in electric vehicles going forward when President Biden gets rid of the gasoline engine, we lose all of our motor fuel. I'm just sort of playing this out.
Right.
If the General Assembly wants to, they can take anything over this amount and put it elsewhere in the budget. Am I correct, or am I misreading the bill?
I think that, so you're saying if you go over the 1% cap, I think what's
Yes.
more likely that you'd have happen there is you're going to look at the signatures of the governor. So if the governor has signed this bill first, then you're going to have to look at the signature of what he signs second. So if he signs the $30 million increase and we've hit the cap, my argument to you would be that we're no longer bound on that $30 million increase.
So that could go anywhere in the budget process.
That would be my argument if you're talking about a new ad. So we're looking at so we've dedicated this fund first.
Right.
These guys get in first, and then we're going to be looking from now. I tell you what, remember, I'm just one lawyer. You hire 2, they can give you 2 different opinions.
But if, and I may be wrong, but if we hit our cap, anything over the cap gets pushed back in a prorated fashion, is what I heard.
Right.
Heard the author say. Is that correct?
The prorate of, I defer to him on the first.
Not proportionate, but I think that
So we're only guaranteeing 1% of the state budget, as far as any of these dedicated fees going forward. Only 1% of the state budget will be dedicated. After you hit that cap, all of this money that's in excess of that 1% now is freed up to go anywhere we decide. So, I mean, that's my point, is we're unraveling the intent with the triggers that we had in 170 and 511 and 105 last year.
I think you're talking about it on dollars, where you might ought to be thinking about it on dedicated fees. So you've dedicated these fees, no other fees can enter that 1%. I see what you're talking about as you hit the top. The concern I think that our legislature would have, going back to Senator Calvert's point, is what you may end up with is more dedicated fees had you not had the 1% cap to begin with. So those who are trying to enter, I think it's, if you do care about these fees, I think it's in the best interest to pass this bill fast, because if other fees were passed and signed faster, then you are putting these fees more at risk.
And you can go back later and take these out. I wouldn't recommend that, but it's possible to do
But
that.
if we took the hotel motel money out, there wouldn't be a problem, because there wouldn't be, but
Well, that
20,
may be
30
something to
million.
look at in the next year.
I think that
where the
also,
money is.
Senator Gooch, if the hotel motel fee is put in place and it raises the revenue, then the 1% is going to raise with that. If we're bringing in more revenue, then the 1% is going to raise with that, and that 1% becomes a bigger number depending on, the more revenue that
Yeah,
we're bringing in.
$1 out of 100.
Well, I hear you, but it does, it's a bit of a moving target, but I think that ultimately, there's multiple ways to think through this, and I guess on one hand you could argue that every single fee that we derive from something that's dedicated, we ought to be paying it, we ought to be using it for exactly what we said we were going to use it for.
I agree.
That would be the most consistent way, but in the practical reality that we deal in the world of gray here, sometimes it's that may not be the most prudent thing, and if we and by doing this at 1%, it puts some integrity into that and something that I think can give confidence, but it may be unwise to go beyond that. But and as you stated, the appropriations process of the General Assembly each year is going to have those options within 99% of the revenue as far as where it goes. This is just taking a little slice of things that we said. This is what we're using this money for, and it's mandating it by law and Constitution.
All right. I think we're ready to go ahead and have a vote on this, and we can come back next year and take one out if it's a problem. But we've got a motion and a second. All those in favor of this, raise your hand. Okay, and let's see, and then those opposed? All right, motion passes. And your sponsor, I think, on the Senate side left us, didn't he? Did we confuse him?
We scared him.
That's right, Senator Dixon. We'll be working with him, and he'll be ready. So.
All right. Okay, we've got good discussion. We've got one more bill today that we were going to do, the foster child tax credit, and this is to incentivize those to get out of the system where they're actually costing the state a lot of money. So if you want to go ahead and present that one, Representative Reeves, as well.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a bill that we passed last year. The House passed this bill unanimously, and when we came back from the COVID break, because of all the uncertainty, we hit the pause button on this, and then this bill recently passed unanimously through the House again this year. All that it does is it increases the state tax credit for parents or for for the adoption of foster children. So an adoptive person or an adoptive couple adopts a foster child. Currently under state law, they receive a $2,000 state tax credit. This raises that amount to $6,000. This is, as everybody in this committee knows, foster children oftentimes come from a lot of trauma and have had a lot of issues that require the need for therapy and counseling, in some cases for the duration of their life. And once a foster parent adopts a foster child or another adoptive person adopts a foster child, the assistance from the state is diminished significantly, and therefore that adoptive parent of the foster child bears a stronger financial burden for raising that child. And so the way I look at this is, what I want, and I think what we all want, we want for people to feel the calling of adopting foster children, that it's a calling, and when you feel that it's something you need to do, we want people to act on it. I would look at it more as a way to, as opposed to an incentive. It is an incentive, but I would look at it as a way to help these parents that take this, that frankly make the courageous decision to do this. And we greatly need our foster kids to be adopted and to have permanent homes. And it is arguably, I know that this is one of those things that, people make these arguments around here all the time, and they're not always met with cheer, but it's a whole lot more expensive for the state to fund a foster child in a year than the tax credit that this is offering. It would take an income of $100,000, a combined income of $100,000 for an adoptive parent of a foster child to be able to take advantage of all $6,000. That's going to be very much the minority. The fiscal note on this whole thing is only $400,000 for the first year, and it's for 5 years. Right now, you get a $2,000 tax credit until the child is 18. Under this, you would get a $6,000 tax credit for 5 years, and then you're back to the $2,000. And again, it's to help offset some of the costs that come with that. I'll be happy to stand for any questions, and Director Rawlings is here and is very proficient on this as well.
You're right, Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Reeves, thank you. You've led on this issue for a long time and done some phenomenal work. So first, let me just say thank you for your leadership. Look, this is the right thing to do morally. We certainly get that. There's no doubt about that. You brought up something, though, that I think is worth everyone having a better understanding and grasp on of what it actually costs the state when a child is in foster care. Do you know what that is off the top of your head?
Can I defer to Director Rawlings on
Sure,
this?
let me turn you on down there at number 7, I believe that is. Go ahead, Director.
Good afternoon. Tom Rollins, Director of DFACS. Had this number on the top of my head a couple of days ago, Chairman. I want to say it's about, let's see, you got child care, you got $5,000. For 6 months, you're talking about $23,000 minimum, but so think about a child who's in foster care for a year. You're talking maybe up to $50,000, but you can't consider just the per diem. So we're paying the per diem for that child. We're paying for a lot of supportive services for the child. But we're also, I think more importantly than that, there is an opportunity cost. We know that each day a child is in foster care and is not either back home with his or her parents or in a permanent or otherwise adoptive home, that their lifetime of ability to contribute to society as well as their lifetime income is dropping because of the trauma of that. So the quicker we can move them from a situation of being in foster care, whatever that daily cost may be, to a situation of permanency, especially the earlier we can do it, the more likely it is that child will feel the love of that adoptive home, will really return that love to others around him or her, and will become a productive member of our society. So I think it's, there are some specific costs we can calculate, but I think there are also a lot of opportunity costs that we are not able to calculate. We have moved, I'll just go ahead and say we've basically doubled the number of children adopted from foster care in Georgia in the last few years. We did about 1,400 last year. And I think this really sends a great signal, a great message. Again, as Leader Reeves said, it's not a question of really people aren't going to adopt. They're going to adopt because they care about these children, not because they're getting paid. But it backs up our hopes with that message from the budget or message from policy that we do care about this.
And thank you for that. Obviously, just doing the right thing and taking care of the kids is always going to be number one. But in this case, you're talking about, $50,000 a year versus $4,000. I think most of us would take that return on investment every day of the week. So this is a great bill. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you again for being here. I look at this bill as two things. I look at it as a situation, a humanitarian situation, from getting a child out of foster care into a loving home. There's a lot of people out there that just want children and a loving. So that's a great part of it. Other part of it, we've talked about in this committee so many times about returns on investment, and Senator Albert just said the same thing a second ago. I look at this as a real return on investment, and I've supported 100%. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that one of the things that this General Assembly has done over the last several years that maybe we haven't done it in any other category like we have, but my gosh, the Senate, the House, and the Governor's office have all made foster care a priority, and there's been initiatives coming out of all three, both chambers and the Governor's office, and I think that we all should be very proud that we've taken some bold steps, and as Director Rollins can tell you, we're actually making a difference. We are reducing the number of kids in foster care. We're increasing the adoptions. We get blamed for a lot of stuff up here, but this is something that we're doing, and we're doing it right. And I think that this is just another step in the multi-steps that are going on across this Capitol with this.
We get a lot of bills over here, and some of them aren't very good. This is a good bill. We're gonna say here for $6,000 you take care of this child, and oh, by the way, you keep them, and they have a permanent home. I mean, it's really good policy, I think.
I make a motion of appropriations, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, our Vice Chair Albers wants to make a motion. Go ahead.
I moved you pass.
We've got a second from Senator Cowsert. All in favor of this, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. One point of clarification on the first bill. I was talking about $30 million from that fee, and I had it mixed up with the innkeeper facilitator bill. And anyway, it's $12 million, I think is the correct number on that.
On the motel.
I was given the wrong number, and I wanted to make sure I didn't leave that out there since it was an incorrect number.
Sure.
All right, with no other business, this meeting is adjourned. And your Senate sponsor.
I can't remember. I think it might be Senator Hatchett.
Okay.
I believe it's Senator Hatchett.
All right, you can let our office
Okay.
know on that. All right, no other business. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, Committee.